Okay, so a couple of weeks back I did a video on the channel as a step-by-step guide, and I know that people like that type of video because it's something that you could watch, practice sort of along to, so to speak, and it gives you a little bit more structure to what you're doing in your practice. So I kind of feel like the area that every amateur golfer wants to improve is impact. And with a recent video that I uploaded, I documented a live lesson with Lynn, and what we saw in that video was the improvement of her impact position by changing her movement. Now, throughout the video, and I should say more particularly maybe throughout the golf lesson, what tends to happen is, just sort of experimentation with different movements. So those of you that are quite experienced with having golf lessons will probably know that you don't necessarily just do one thing the whole session. You'll try different movements. And the reason why you're doing that is to sort of just try and explore things that you don't do. So as I kind of hit a few shots talking you through a few little processes, the first thing that we'll see is we've got some alignment sticks down on the ground, which is really important for golfers, because so many golfers that I meet, just the alignment is off and the compensations are happening before anything else. But the first thing that we need to understand is if you are struggling with your impact, which means that you don't strike the golf ball consistently, or you're kind of like a little bit too sort of scoopy and flicky, the first thing you need to do is you need to get lower to the ground, okay? And the way you're going to do that, just as a little sort of awareness drill, is if you sort of put your hands across your lower part of your stomach and go into posture and just point the back of your hands down towards your lead ankle. And what this is doing is this is really encouraging that pelvis to get sort of downward facing, which will help you really cover the golf ball. So as I hit a few shots now, similar to what we saw with Lynn, instead of kind of pelvis up like so and standing up, and you're then going to end up being taller to the golf ball, so you'll miss hit it or you'll get flippy, you can just kind of do a few swings where you get that feeling of pelvis down, then you'll get that increased sense of weight pressure, which is perfect. Now what I tend to do in lessons, and again I've mentioned this as well before, I use the orange whipboard for exactly this. I get the student to place the trail foot at the top, and again it just gives you that sense of weight pressure and moving very much this way. And as I've said to you guys, you don't necessarily need to go out and purchase such an object, but what you can do is you can just get yourself a little block of wood or something, or a little raised surface, so that at least when you go to the range you can sort of pop your trail heel up like so your toes down, your heels elevated, and again get that pelvis down. And all this is going to do is just really get that rotation and weight pressure moving really early. So you've got options there, but I think for now the idea of just being lower, so hips down, you can kind of see the way if I do that type of motion, the way it will naturally get my chest more over the ball, and therefore that will naturally drop that right shoulder down, and that's a really, really big movement. Now, whilst you're sort of doing this, what you need to be careful of is, I think when golfers start to trigger just rotational movement, they can do that, but then everything sort of follows suit. So the club comes down too steep. So that's again the reason why having some alignment sticks is really important, because whilst you're trying to incorporate this sort of downward feeling, you can still try and manage up your club path. So try to make sure that the club doesn't travel this way and that it still travels inside those guidelines. Now if you do that movement correctly, what you'll notice, and hopefully you'll start to hear here, hips down in the address position and just hit a few shots, you'll start to hear that sort of sense of compression. This is exactly what happened to Lynn as well. And it just gives you really positive feedback that it's the correct sort of type of motion that you want to be doing. So hips down and left, you get the feeling that almost like that trail heel is slightly lifted, or it certainly doesn't feel like it's got much weight pressure on it. Make sure when you're doing it you keep your shoulders as square as you can, not this way. And then from there you just get that feeling of maintaining that club path, get some straight shots, get some really good compression going. Now the way that you evolve this, and I'll move the camera shortly, but the way you evolve this then is when golf gets a little bit sort of like tapping your head and rubbing your belly, so to speak, is if you start moving this way with your body, then like I said, you need to make sure that you're matching up that club path, and you'll often feel like your hands are going potentially maybe more towards the right of the target as you bring your rotation. That's each to their own. But a real good test would be to use a shaft extender. Okay, so if I place the shaft extender so it's alongside my lead hit, and I hit a few shots now, I can hit straight shots. Okay, let's move that camera over for a second. So what happens next is that you've sort of got these feelings of being downward, and what you'll notice is that it's much easier to get lower to the ground, so the contact improves. And then the next thing that you'll notice is that, okay, yeah, if you're hitting a few shots maybe towards the left hand side for a right-handed golfer, then you're slightly mindful of maintaining that club path. And another way of doing that, if you're not that aware of what that means, is to start practicing with like a shaft extender. And the idea is that as I move my body still down and left, I want to try and get the feeling that my hands are leading to make sure that I don't strike myself in the rib cage. And that's the sense that you really want to be getting in the golf swing. We want to be eliminating these sort of standing up and straightening right arms, and you want to get more of a feeling of driving those hands through and clearing that body out the way. Because if you can hit the golf ball in that sort of capacity, then you're really going to start to be able to control things much more than you have done previously. And I don't think this session is necessarily so much about the whole sequence and how you put it all together, but it's more about just having that sort of different perspective of how it could feel to hit the golf ball and how you potentially change your impact position. And it's sort of to know that, yes, this is a very difficult exercise with the shaft extender, but you know, with time and with practice, you'll certainly be able to get there. You know, just something that you might not be great at to get started with, but you know, through perseverance, hips down and left, shaft lean forward, I'm just sort of showcasing that it can sort of be done. Now, there's one last little piece of the puzzle that I want to talk about in this video in particular, and that's because we've talked about being downward, we've talked about hands forward, and therefore managing things like your club path. The last little piece of the puzzle is, well, when we hit the golf ball, the feeling really wants to be like an extension, really. And that's the point that I want to kind of conclude with. So if I sort of hold my finish position here, so I swing back and through, you can kind of see the way that my chest is up, my left shoulder goes back and behind me, and therefore that sort of propels my hands up and forward. So although a lot of your emphasis will be on moving down and left, you can kind of still see the way that because this is going down, and then as we start to come up in the hit, that starts to create the correct sort of angles where we're still getting that blend of being down in the start of the downswing position from that sort of feeling we had earlier, but then as we hit it, it's much more up and through. And again, if too many amateur golfers get the up bit right, but you're up too soon, you don't get that down bit. So it's not like we're hitting it completely staying down, but at the same sort of token, what we're doing is we're getting that feeling of up. Okay, so it really is all of a sudden very much an awareness of hips down and left, hands driving through, and then as we come up, you'll really feel like your hands are lifted up and you go to the through swing. And that's the beauty of this exercise, because if you do have the confidence to incorporate this, and you're somebody who sort of straightens out too early and stands up, it's going to hit you in the rib cage. And what this does is, by trying to get the hands further forward and then learning that you can come up with it as well, and it really is just a really good exercise to get a solid feeling. And you can hit full shots with it, and you can do it particularly with longer clubs as well. It's just a very difficult thing to do. Swing back, up and through. So I would strongly suggest that you have a go at doing this. If you don't have the confidence to do this type of thing down the driving range, then what I tend to suggest for students that I work with is to at least try it at home. You know, maybe buy some of those sort of foam balls or the sort of 30% reduced flight balls. And even if you're just smacking those down the garden, but at least you're embedding much better technique of downward shaft lean and then getting more up in that hit, you're going to get the blend of everything. Let me know how you guys get on. I'll catch up with you really soon.